Everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to be checking out the NBA and college basketball slate. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really helps the channel a lot. I really do appreciate it. For both these slates, these are rough slates. We have a 4-game NBA slate and a 3-game college basketball slate, and it's really hard to find much that I like in either one of them, to be honest. But we're going to break it down and see what we think. So for this NBA slate first, we have 4 games featuring Toronto, Indiana, Detroit, New York, Brooklyn, Memphis, and Miami and Sacramento. For the Pistons, Stewart and Sasser is out. For the Knicks, Randall, OG, and Robinson are out. For the Nets, Simmons is questionable. For the Grizzlies, Bain, Morant, Smart, Pippen, and Conchar are all out. For the Heat, Hero and Rozier are both questionable. Butler, Richardson, and Jovic are out. So the big questions here are for Brooklyn with Simmons out, or being questionable, and with Miami with Hero and Rozier questionable. Those are the big question marks for the slate, and that Miami game could definitely be changed a lot as we get closer to it, depending on that questionable tags. It's also annoying that that game is at 10 p.m., so that is going to be a rough thing to figure out for the slate. So right now, though, we do have some guys we do like. We're going to start off with our most expensive option at Domantas Sabonis. Now, he's been oddly consistent lately. I mean, not oddly, really. He's played very well. Over 49 fantasy points in 12 straight games. Even versus tough defenses, he's done that, including a game against Miami. His consistency is worth a look here, but going against Miami is definitely risky. However, he had 68 fantasy points against them the one time he's played them, so he definitely has some utility here, but that definitely carries a lot of risk. Looking at Jalen Brunson for the Knicks, he has played very well with all the injuries to the team, and he's been the focal point of the offense lately. As his fantasy points have gone up, so has his price. He is about as high as price as he's been, which gives him some risk here. He does need to get around 48, 49 fantasy points to pay off here. He can do it, but it's not a great matchup, or, I mean, it is a good matchup, but it's not a great opportunity as he has been inconsistent, and he definitely has a lower floor than we'd like at that price point. De'Aaron Fox is a guy I really want to like today. It's a tough matchup against Miami, which is a concern here because they slow it down, but Fox has been absolutely balling the last 4 games, as we can see, 28 to 40 real points in those 4 games. He struggled some before the All Star break, but had a couple games before it that he kind of broke out finally. But he's been inconsistent throughout the season, but he has a lot of potential. They've won 3 of the last 4 games as well with his stellar play, and as long as he's shooting a ton of shots, he's definitely worth a look. And he is a little underpriced for his upside, but those low floor games has really hurt him down the stretch. But I do think he's got some utility on this one. Looking at Miles Turner for Indiana, now he has been inconsistent as anybody on the slate. We know that as a history, but he's been over 34 fantasy points in 6 of the last 7 games. That gives him a lot of utility here if he can continue to play well, being back in the starting lineup and stuff like that, because he had some. He was sick for a few games before. So in the last 2 games, he's been back. He's been very solid. So as long as he's going to continue to play solid, then he's definitely going to be somebody worth a look. And with Indiana at full strength, he should get some utility, some opportunity here. Josh Hart for the Knicks has played very well since Randall and OG went down. And though he has a really low floor, he's played well and has a nice ceiling. And we're not going to find too many guys that are $6,500. They're going to get 35 minutes a game right now. So he's definitely worth a look. And he's been getting it with rebounds and assists and points as well. So he's playing very well fantasy wise, and that gives him a lot of utility here. Though he hasn't had particularly great games on the road this season. This is a home game, so that gives him a little bit more upside, and against a weak defense as well. Though he does carry some risk. Mathurian for Indiana. Now, if he continues to be in the starting lineup, which he's been the last couple games, then he's definitely worth a look here. Now, he started the season in the starting lineup, and he didn't do particularly well. But the last 2 games, he has done extremely well, and it looks like he might stick in that lineup for a little while. Now, Nesmith should be back, and so should Smith, as there's no injuries for the Pacers today. So that could come back to bite us here with him not being in the starting lineup again. But as you can see, he did start some games with those injuries in the last few weeks, and that has played off well for him. So he's definitely worth a look if he draws that start, but you do want to make sure that he is in the starting lineup from that perspective. Looking at Gigi Jackson for Memphis. Now, Memphis is playing the Skeleton Crew game. here with a bunch of guys that are, in the G League coming up to the Grizzlies. He's going to have some risk here, but as he definitely has a low floor, but he's been playing pretty well, and he's got 40 fantasy point upside, and on a small slate like this, where you get some, where it's limited in the value plays, he's definitely one of the better sub $5,000 options available on the slate. Then we're going to look at Detroit and look at Grimes for Detroit. Now, he has been inconsistent as all get out, but it looks like he's going to be in the starting lineup potentially here, or at least play 25 or so minutes. Would be his second game with Detroit that he's actually played, as he was traded from the Knicks. So he does have some potential here. He's been injured, so that is a little concern. We know that he has a super low floor, but his dirt cheap price, as long as he's going to get around 25-30 minutes, and he's definitely worth a look, especially on a small slate like this being minimum price. He does help you pay out for, either Fox, Brunson, or Sabonis as well. So honestly, this slate is pretty rough. When we get the news on Hero and Rozier, that could open up a lot with Duncan Robinson and Jaquez and Caleb Martin. And if we got the news that Simmons was going to be ruled out for some reason, then that could open up Johnson here and Cam Thomas as well. So we definitely have some potential there. Memphis is just a mess and a half. I mean, a little bit overpriced and craziness there. But overall, I think the slate is pretty rough. Let's move into the college basketball slate here. Now, this slate features 3 games. Now, we have West Virginia versus Kansas State, Miami versus UNC, Baylor versus TCU. All 3 of these games, the home team is favored. Now TCU is only a 3-point favorite over Baylor. This is the tightest matchup of this slate, and the Miami North Carolina game has the biggest spread, with North Carolina having a 14.5 spread. However, it also has the highest total by quite a few points. And then Kansas State West Virginia is pretty much the slowdown game. Kansas State is favored but to win by 9, and West Virginia is probably the weakest team on this particular slate. Now I've broken this slate down and a couple things. I got my top plays, and then I have some GPP only plays because of the high risk from those players. And then I have a couple guys that are kind of Hail Marys off the bench value type plays. As you're going to see that there's not a ton of value on the slate, and as we have $6,200 per player, you're gonna have to take some risks on this one to have some potential here. So obviously, the most stackable teams are UNC, TCU, and Baylor, as the other games have a lot more risk when it comes to those players. But let's go and get into it here. So we're going to start with our overall top plays. One being Baycott for North Carolina. Now, obviously, they're favored to win. They're favored to score the most fantasy points, total points, and fantasy points on the slate. And I expect that they're going to have a good opportunity to do this. Baycott has played well throughout the season. He has a 34 to 40 fantasy point range. Now, his range is not as high as other options on the slate, especially with him being the most expensive player. That's not ideal, but he has a safe floor, and he only needs 36 fantasy points really to pay off here. So he's definitely worth a look. If we're looking for him to get 3.5 to 4.5 on the slate, on the 5x, on the 4x radar because of his price. Looking at R.J. Davis for North Carolina, he might be my favorite play on the slate, as he has just as much upside as Baycott, but he's at $900 cheaper. He would basically be my core play if I really wanted to have one. His lower floor is definitely a little bit annoying, but he's had those slow floor games and slow down games. This is not going to be a slow down game, and the last time he played Miami, he had 48 fantasy points, and I do think he can do that again. I don't expect him to score 25 points, but I think he gets some assists and some rebounds in this one to help him get over 35 fantasy points at least. And he only needs 32 really to pay off here, so he's a great option on the slate. And in fact, I do think I'm just going to make him a core play for this one, even though I wasn't really intending to do so. He's played well enough lately. That low floor does scare me that a little bit, but he's probably the safest play on the slate in general. Looking at Jesse Edwards for West Virginia, now he definitely carries some risk, but his floor, even though he's had a couple of floor games against one against TCU recently and one against Oklahoma State, he's largely been over 29 fantasy points most of the way, especially lately, and that gives him some potential here. Now he definitely has some risk as he's on the away team, and which he's struggled more on the road, and he's only had a handful of games on the road for that matter this season, as he's missed a lot of games through injuries. But and this is kind of an ugly matchup, and they're the lowest scoring team on the slate. And he's a little bit overpriced, but he definitely has a pretty good ceiling potential here because he can get in the mid 30s and high 30s even. And against Kansas State, the last time they played, he did not play, so we don't have that kind of information. But I do think he draws some interesting upside here because it's not the Kansas State's not the worst, the best defense ever, and so he has some potential here. Uh, Emmanuel Miller for TCU. If you want to stack up TCU, he's a good way to go about it. His floor is slightly lower than what we need him, as we need him to get around 28 fantasy points today at least. But he has a very high ceiling at around 40 fantasy points, so that gives him a lot of potential here. And against Baylor, the last time he played, he scored 30 fantasy points, which is right about where we want him to be at least, and that gives us some potential here. Though he does tend to have some scoring dependency at times, he does rebound well enough to get us over where we want, so he's definitely worth a look on the slate, and this being a home game for him also helps a little bit. Looking at Taylor Perry um, for Kansas State. Now he's probably my favorite play from Kansas State as he's got a lot of utility here and he's probably got the most upside of anybody on that team. However, he has a pretty low floor for somebody over $7,000. That does give me some concern, but he's pretty safe from that perspective. He hasn't had any super bad games except for against BYU, but in the one game, but he redeemed that. In his other game against West Virginia, he only scored 18 fantasy points, but I do think he'll do better than that in this one. He just didn't shoot the ball well that game. And that game was also on the road, so being at home, I think he's going to have a lot of more upside, and that should give him some potential here. Then we'll look at Nigel Pack for Miami. Now, this is now saying he's ruled out, and that has changed because he was a game time decision earlier. So with him being ruled out now, he's definitely not in play, and that would open up some potential here from Miami. That literally just changed in between me doing the research and starting the video. So we'll look at that here in just a minute. Let's look at Miami. What they will do, I actually know what they will do. So what they will do with him out is they will move to Benzie Joseph, who has actually been pretty solid the last couple games. With him out, he had 18 and 31 fantasy points in those and then 34 in the game before that. Those are the three games that Pack had missed already. And so he would definitely move into being a viable option here, though he does carry some risk uh, as he's a little bit more expensive than Pack was, and uh, he's got a lower ceiling and floor than Pack does. But he's actually relatively cheap here. He needs 24 fantasy points to really pay off for us, and he's been okay. So he's definitely somebody that's worth a look, but he's not a must play here on the slate. Um, so then we're going to look at Cormac Ryan for North Carolina. Now Ryan has played pretty well lately. He's a little bit underpriced at $5,700. He needs 22 fantasy points, and while he does have a lower floor because he's had some really low games and he didn't play a ton of minutes last time he played Miami, he's been playing more minutes last few games and he's really getting more opportunity and he's been in double-digit points, but he is very scoring dependent, so do keep that in mind. But he's kind of a high risk, high reward play here. Some other plays that are kind of GPP plays would be Omir for Miami, Harrison Ingram for North Carolina. He definitely carries some nice upside today, as does Omir. Rajay Davis here for Baylor. Where is he at? Oh shoot, I'm in forwards. All right, sorry about that. Rajay Dennis here for Baylor. He has some good upside, and he actually had a massive game against TCU the last time they played, where he scored 45 fantasy points. He still has a lower floor than I'd like, so that is a concern there. Jalen Bridges for Baylor also in play. Baylor's a good stackable team, but it's going to be somewhat hard to roster them because they're a little bit overpriced today. But he's definitely in play. Raquame Battle for West Virginia has some nice utility today. For TCU, PV and Jameer Nelson both have some upside, that they have extremely low floors. Now, PV doesn't have the upside that Nelson has. In fact, Nelson has about as much upside as anybody on the slate, but he tends to be robust just about every game, so he definitely draws some extreme GPP only play. Keyshawn George here from Miami also in play, though he does carry some risk in this one but with um, with the Pack out, him and Bensley Joseph both have some potential in this one. Then we're going to look at Messi for Baylor. Now he has some utility here, though he's risky. He has a high ceiling, and that's why he's considered here, but he definitely has a super low floor. I also have a couple of value plays that we're going to look at here. I have three what I consider Hail Mary plays, and one of them is David Ngessen for Kansas State. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. He has some utility here, but he's definitely a Hail Mary option at this price point. McNair for Kansas State also kind of in that situation as a Hail Mary off the bench utility play. And then Avery Anderson for TCU falls in the same kind of category. They all have very low upside, but they have a tendency to go off for big games. Then I have three extreme value plays. Mustafa for TCU has actually played a couple more minutes last couple games, and he should draw some more minutes in this game as a result. Now he definitely carries some risk, but the thing with him is we need to wait and see if Uday is ruled out. If Uday was to be ruled out, and he's currently a game time decision, he would become a viable option on the slate to be in there for 10 to 15 minutes and get some fantasy points. Langston Love for Baylor is actually questionable. He's a game time decision today. If he were to play, he would have some potential, but he's missed 4 of the last 5 games with injuries, and so I'm concerned even if he does play that he won't get as many minutes. Also, Kobe Johnson, he might be the safest of the cheap plays for West Virginia. He's had 3 straight games over 28 fantasy points in a row, and he's played well in those. But he's been bad in most conference play with not a whole lot of utility. But with him in the starting 5, he has some potential, but he definitely carries some risk. So, but he's nice and cheap. So this slate is pretty rough. As I said, both these NBA and college basketball slates really stink. I don't like either one. So I'm going to be playing extremely light, but this is what these are the guys I think have the most chance. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.